Welcome to Season 2, Episode 43 of the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. I'm Michaela Peterson, Dad's daughter and collaborator. Today's episode is a 12 Rules for Life lecture recorded in Adelaide, Australia on February 11th, 2019, named Structuring Your Worldview. Enjoy the podcast. Structuring Your Worldview, a Jordan B. Peterson 12 Rules for Life lecture.
Thank you. It's good to see that you put some more effort into this than those people in Perth. They couldn't even conjure up any protesters. So what I thought I'd do, I always have a problem in the back of my mind that I'm trying to work on when I do one of these lectures. And, you know, I have a set of problems that I'm always working on, and I'm trying to clarify their nature more, so they're easier to state, and also to formulate more precise and hopefully useful answers. I think that's a nice combination, precision and utility. It's a nice quality for a tool, for example, and most ideas are best conceptualized as tools, you know, because we have to make our way in the world, and we're tool-using creatures, and so we need accurate tools. And so formulating things precisely and elegantly so that they can be used properly in the world is it's a worthy aim, and it's certainly the aim of any intellectual endeavor that's worthy of the name. You know, it's not something that's merely abstract or ivory tower. If it is, there's something wrong. And so I thought what I would do today is to see if I could get a little farther in describing the structure through which we look at the world. And I think that I'm going to try to make this case. We'll see how it goes. At the highest resolution level, the structure is actually it's simple and quite understandable. But at the highest levels of abstraction, it gets much more difficult and harder and harder to represent and harder to understand, but also more and more important. Because, you know, the things you do from second to second, well, in some sense, they're not that important, but how that all adds up to your whole life, that's important. Well, it's kind of easy to say what you're doing from second to second or minute to minute, but it might be difficult to say what it is that you're doing for your whole life, or what you should be doing for your whole life, even more particularly. But it's necessary to know all of that. And so I'm going to see if I can meld some things together tonight that I haven't been able to meld together before. So I think I'm going to start with a relatively simple observation. If you're a psychologist, there's a number of things that you do to help people. If you're a good psychologist, there's a number of things you do to damage them if you're a bad psychologist. But let's assume that you're not a bad psychologist to begin with. You help them reflect upon events in their lives that damaged them. And those are times when they went off the track in some sense, or someone pushed them off the track. And you can tell when something like that's happened in your life, often because you have negative emotional reaction to it. That's the first thing. That's what negative emotion signifies, that you've gone off the path in some fundamental way. And then you have negative memories, and the negative memories, especially if they're still alive, especially if they're more than about 18 months old, if the negative memories are still alive, it means that you've gone off the path in a way that you don't understand, and you've never really completely found your way back. And if you had, you wouldn't have the negative memory anymore. You would have fixed it. You would have extracted the information from the occurrence that was necessary to put things right again. And that's a useful thing. It's useful to know that, and just from a practical perspective, if you have a memory that won't let you go, in some sense it's because there's part of you that's stuck back there. You never imagine that you have to understand everywhere you've been. You especially have to understand where you've been if it wasn't good. And the reason that you need to understand where you've been if it wasn't good is so that you don't go there again, right? Because that's the purpose of memory. It's not to remember the past. It's to remember the past in such a way that you can duplicate the good things about the past in the future and that you can avoid the bad things about the past in the future. Again, it's tool-like, it's practical. And so if you have a memory that's 18 months old or older, there's neurological reasons for that, and it's still negative, it means that there's a hole that you fell in, and you might fall in it again because you don't know how it was that you got there. And so the part of your brain that produces negative emotion isn't going to let that go, ever. It will never let that go until you figure it out, because it's there to protect you. And if it thinks that there's a trap waiting for you that you might suddenly fall in at any moment because you don't understand how it happened, then it's never going to let you go. But it's interesting how abstract this process can be. I've been working with this gentleman who had a brutal childhood. Man, you just can't imagine it. It was everything you could hope for in a brutal childhood. I mean, he was taken away from his parents. He was assaulted in the most reprehensible manner by the most malevolent people when he was completely helpless for years on end, starved, taken away from his family, demeaned, brutal, man. And he often had nightmares about it. And he's about 50, he's about my age now, had nightmares about it. And the nightmares especially would occur during the year when the same month that he would have returned to school. That's actually quite common, It's one of the things that you learn if you study dreams, is that often the time a dream occurs has some relevance to its fundamental meaning. And it's not easy to figure out what a dream means often, which is also quite mysterious, because you think if the damn dream had something to say, that it'd just come out and say it. Like, what the hell's the point of the mystery, And well, Freud's answer to that was that dreams contained information that people resisted. They didn't want to know, and so the dream had to be, in some sense, camouflaged symbolically to make it palatable in some sense to the perceiver, which I don't think is true, except in a very restricted number of cases. I liked Carl Jung's explanation a lot better. I think it's true. And it went along with explanation that was also generated by a developmental psychologist named Jean Piaget, who was very interested in dreams. And their notion was that dreams are just confusing because they're the birthplace of thought. Like, a dream is where you start to think something up, but you haven't got it fully thought up, and that's why it's not clear, because it wouldn't be clear if you were just thinking it up. And you know what that's like. Lots of times you're just starting to think something up and it's not clear. You see this with arguments that you have with people very frequently. If you live with someone in an intimate situation, husband or a wife, you come home and you're crabby and miserable about some damn thing, and maybe something will trigger you. I don't know, someone does something you think is annoying, and it might be, and you explode to a degree that's much greater than the event seems to warrant, and then you have a bit of a conflict with your person because they're not very happy about being the target for your emotion, and then you have a fight about it, and then like 2 hours later you figure out what the hell it was that you were upset about, and maybe it was something that your boss said 3 days ago that seemed to indicate that the promotion that you'd been hoping for and working for like 3 years was less likely to go to you than to someone else, and you didn't bloody well even know that was what was bothering you, and it took a lot of digging to get down into the underlying structure of your thinking, your fantasy, before you could even find out what the hell the emotion was there for. And if you communicate intently with people that you love, or even people that you don't love, you find very, very frequently it takes a long time if you're having a conflict, to even figure out what the conflict is about. Once you've figured that out, well, sometimes that can be terribly difficult, but often once you've figured out what the conflict actually is about, you're 3/4 of the way to resolving it. And dreams are dreams play part of that process, is that they're part of how we stretch ourselves out into the world with fantasy, and think about how things might be. And maybe they're not that way, but maybe they are. And we don't leap from not knowing to knowing perfectly in one fell swoop. There has to be this intermediary process of acting out, and then of imagining, and then of contemplating the imagination, and then of articulating the contemplation, and then of communicating it, and then of planning as a consequence of the communication. Then you kind of have a handle on the world. Before then, it takes all of that to come up with real knowledge. Anyways, one of the things that's quite cool about having talked to my friend about his dreams is that he often has these dreams where he's still being attacked and he's 5 years old, and it really, he wakes up with like physical symptoms, really serious physical symptoms of it's almost impossible to believe that someone could have the physical symptoms that he does, and I'm not going to describe them, but they're a consequence of these nightmares. And then he takes it out on his family, and he feels bitter and cynical about the world and hates people and himself, and it's no bloody wonder, I can tell you that. It's amazing that he's in as good a shape as he is, given what he went through. It's a hell of a thing to recover from, to forgive, to forget. I mean, those words are weak, man. And when you're talking about situations where people have been through hell, those are just cliches. But one of the things I suggested to him was that, and this is a good thing to suggest to people, you can do this with dreams. So if you have a recurrent nightmare, for example, what that means is that your imagination has gripped a part of the world that you don't understand, that presents a danger to you. And it's part of the anxiety and disgust system, if it's producing negative emotion generally. And it's an alarm system, and it isn't going to let you go. You think, well, why do I have to be cursed with a recurrent nightmare? Well, it's because you have an alarm system, and the alarm system is saying, danger, 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 danger. And unless you think about how to not have that danger, then the alarm system isn't going to go off, because it doesn't want you falling into the same hole again. And so it's miserable that you're stuck with the problem. I mean, it's no joke that you're stuck with the problem. You can't just wish it away, because the problem is real. Now, it doesn't mean it's well-defined necessarily, because an alarm system isn't a precise diagnosis of a problem. It's just a description that something's gone wrong. And then to precisely define it and then to conjure up a solution takes a tremendous amount of work. And so when I was talking to him, I suggested, well, look, here's something you're going to have to do, and you're going to hate it because it's a hateable thing. You wake up in the morning, you have these nightmares. Now what you have to do is, when you have the nightmare, you have to sit during the day and you have to think about the nightmare. You have to bring it back to mind in as much visual detail as you can, and you have to allow the emotions that you were experiencing to reemerge. And you think, God, of all the bloody things you wouldn't want to ask someone to do if they were suffering, in that manner, it would be exactly that. But, there's a woman named Edna Foa who's a real psychologist, and she treated women who had post-traumatic stress disorder from violent sexual abuse, stranger rapes, which are actually quite rare and, of course, very horrifying. And she used exposure, same sort of idea, and she hooked her clients to psychophysiological measuring devices that measured heart rate and skin conductance and other indices of physiological response, and then had them relive their horrifying experiences voluntarily, and showed that the women who showed the highest levels of negative response, like the most extreme levels of negative response while they were re-experiencing voluntarily the traumatic occurrence, got better faster and stayed better longer. And it's quite a mystery, because you'd think, well, if the damn event did you in, so to speak, why in the world would re-experiencing the event be curative? And the answer is, there's a bloody big difference between having something happen to you accidentally and facing it purposefully. Like there's all the difference in the world. It truly is the case. You don't even respond physiologically to the same thing that you run away from that you do that when you face it. Your whole different physiological systems are in play, and fundamentally we're built to confront catastrophe voluntarily. That works. Now, that doesn't mean you won't get killed, because it is, after all, catastrophe. And none of this is mindless optimism. Just because you decide that you're going to act in a heroic manner doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get killed. And you're going to get killed anyways, because that's how life goes. But you don't have a better bet than that, generally speaking, than to confront what it is that's threatening you forthrightly. And in that, there's some possibility that you'll discover how it is that you will deal with it. And it's not easy, This friend of mine, he was abused by terrible men, the sort of men who would sexually assault children who were putatively under their educational care, let's say. And, that's a dark problem to untangle. One of the things that an experience like that leaves you with is, well, why? Period, right? Why, period? Why me? That would be the next question. And another question would be, how in the world can there be people like that? And then another question would be, how can the world be like that? And another question would be, well, what am I like if there are people who are like that and I'm also a person? That's another problem. And then another problem is, well, what am I left with of myself once I've been through an experience like that? And it's not like those are simple questions to answer. Though every single one of those questions is an absolute bloody killer. Like they're deep philosophical questions. And they're sorts, and that's really why those sorts of occurrences cause post-traumatic stress disorder. They're so difficult that that the mere fact that the question has been posed in some sense is enough to produce psychophysiological damage. Because if you have post-traumatic stress disorder, it produces relatively permanent neurological transformations. One of the things that happens is that part of your brain called the amygdala, which is responsible for a negative emotion, it's responsible for many things, but that's one of the things it's responsible for. It grows. And another part called the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that seems to be something like the central meeting place between articulated memories and the control systems for emotions, it shrinks. Now, memories control emotions because, if you're somewhere and you know what you're doing and you've been there before, well, then you have the situation mastered in some sense. All of you have been in situations like this before, right? In crowds, in a theater, listening to a speaker, you're familiar with this, and because you're familiar with it, you have memories that are similar to it, and so the memories stop you from being apprehensive, Like most of you don't know the people that you're sitting beside, and you certainly don't know all the people around you, but you notice they're all kind of acting the same way you are, which indicates that they at least know what the bloody rules are and are unlikely to go off sideways in some catastrophic way, and so your memory structures inhibit your emotions, and that's what keeps you calm. And that's also really something unbelievably worth knowing, because one of the things that I tried to wrestle with for a long time was why it was that people were so, let's say, enamored of their belief systems, why we would fight to the death to protect our belief systems, because we clearly will. And part of the answer to that is, well, our belief systems regulate our emotions. It's the fact that it's more complicated than that, because it's not only that you know how the world works, and because you know how the world works, then you don't have to be terrified everywhere you go, like you would be if you were dropped naked in a jungle in the middle of the night, let's say. It's not merely that you know, it's that you know and other people know at the same time, so that we can all go places together and we can act out the same belief system. And because we can do that, well, then we can cooperate and we can compete and we can predict each other quite nicely. We kind of have some sense that we're all pursuing the same aims, at least to some degree. Well, here we're pursuing precisely the same aim. I mean, technically speaking, all of you are aiming your perception at the stage, right? So technically, you're all pursuing the same aim, and you all can see that, and you're all acting that out, and that's why you can sit here calmly, and maybe even more than calmly, you calmly and risk being interested in what's going on. And so that's interesting, that there's this interesting isomorphism between each of our beliefs. If we're in a culture that's functional, we all have our beliefs about how the world works, but then we share those beliefs with the people that are around us. And then if there's a match between how we think the world should be going and how everyone else is acting around us, then we're calm. And that's why and how beliefs regulate our emotions. And so that's why culture is necessary. It's partly why the idea of multiculturalism is actually wrong. Now, I don't want to be like too cut and dried about that, because there's some real utility in diversity of human experience, right? And that's because human beings have complicated problems to solve. And if we all thought exactly the same way, well, that would be great if we were all doing perfectly well, but it would be a complete bloody catastrophe if anything ever went wrong, because we wouldn't have any solutions to the problems. So we want some variability in people, because new problems are going to come along, and who knows who's going to solve it. It isn't going to be everyone. It'll be some oddball who comes up with some crazy solution. Well, 1,000 other people come up with crazy solutions that are wrong, and maybe the one guy or the one woman who manages the proper crazy solution produces the answer for all of us, and thank God for diversity of opinion because of that. But having said all that, and knowing perfectly well that variability in human ability is a remarkable thing, because we can all share that as well. Some of us are musicians, and some of us are artists, and some of us are teachers, and some of us are lawyers, and some of us are plumbers, and thank God for all that. We still have to be nested inside a coherent structure that's partly cognitive, that it's partly your belief system, and it's partly sociological, so that we are all playing the same game. And that's really the definition of peace and prosperity and productivity. At some level, we have to be playing the same game, because we can't trust each other any more than a bunch of kids on an elementary school playground. They can't organize themselves unless they're all playing the same game. It's just fractious and fighting if they can't decide that, well, it's time to take 10 minutes to play soccer instead of just arguing about what game we're going to play. So, and this is a technical thing that we have to get right when we're thinking about the multitude of cultures that inhabits the world. It's like, yes, the diversity is a wonderful thing, and let's not be foolish about that. And the diversity culturally and also individually. But that has to be nested inside something that coheres and brings us together. And then the question is, well, what might that be? And that's actually part of what I'm trying to drive at tonight. My friend, one of the things I recommended to him with his dreams was, said, you gotta think about your dream, and you gotta bring it to mind, man. You're not gonna like this, but you gotta bring it to mind, and maybe you should do it when you first wake up because it's fresh in your mind, and then maybe you should do it just before you go to sleep again. And so that's a good trick, by the way, if you have recurrent nightmares, or even if you don't sleep very well, and you know that there are thoughts that are disturbing you, mostly dream-related thoughts. You bring the dream to mind just before you go to sleep, and just before you fall asleep, you kind of enter that stage where you start to dream, but you're still a little bit awake. The images start to come. It's called a hypnagogic state. If you can bring the dream to mind then, that's extremely helpful, especially if you can also play with it a little bit and update it a little bit. And so what I said to him was, well, you're not 5. This is the thing, your dream's wrong, right? I mean, you were helpless, and the dream is representing that, but somehow you're still 5 in your damn dream. It's like, that's no good. It's no wonder you're still terrified. You're 58, you're not 5. You're stuck back there. It's like a part of his soul is back there, and that's more true than you'd think, because it means part of him didn't grow up, and it means there's information back there that he didn't incorporate, and so that means part of him hasn't developed as much as it needs to, and that's partly why he's still suffering. And then he told me that he hadn't looked in the mirror for 35 years. So that was really something, that was really remarkable, and some of that was shame. Well, a lot of it was shame. And I said, well, it's no bloody wonder that you don't know how old you are then. It's like, you haven't seen how old you are. I said, maybe you're gonna have to look in the mirror, and so he said he never brushed his teeth in the mirror, he didn't comb his hair in the mirror, none of that. He avoided mirrors. And so he was avoiding self-reflection, right? He didn't want to see who he was. And you can understand that if you've been damaged badly enough that you might not want to see that. But it doesn't matter, because there it is, man. And what are you going to do, not look? Because it's there. And so I said, well, you better spend an hour looking at yourself in the mirror. And so he did that. And he said it was a very strange experience because, he didn't realize how old he was, because, 58's not young, And so he could see all sorts of things about him that were quite shocking, that, his face was somewhat lined and his teeth were not the teeth of someone who was 20. And he's not a bad looking guy for 58, but he's had a hard life and he's a little bit beat up around the edges and could be worse, but it was quite a shock for him. And he said it made him cry and it made him laugh, and it was a shock. And he did that a lot. And he thought about his dreams a lot. And then he started getting older in his dreams, which is really cool, and quite fast too. Given that he'd been stuck there for 53 years. It took about 4 months before he was 40 in his dreams. And now he's as old as he is in his dreams. And he said the truly negative elements of his dreams have just about disappeared completely. Along with that, a fair bit of the bitterness. And look, I don't want to be, again, I'm not any Pollyanna about this. He's not done with this. When school time comes around next year, I'm sure he'll make another descent into the abyss, because these things are very difficult to straighten out. His big problem is that he has to come to terms with the fundamental reality of human evil, right? How the hell else are you going to say it? When you're thinking about, so you went to a school that was supposed to educate people, and the school was taken over, at least in part, by people whose fundamental goal was to sexually prey on children in the most sadistic possible manner imaginable, and starve them, and misuse them, and not educate them, all at the same time, all while pretending that what they were doing was something Christian and positive. Now, I don't know what your word for that is. I mean, maybe you have a word that's better than evil, but I don't have a better word for that, and so I'm going to stick with it. And it's a damn useful word under those sorts of circumstances. And it's also the case that if terrible things happen to you and you develop something like post-traumatic stress disorder and you don't have a fully fledged philosophy of good and evil, you will not recover. And I've talked to a lot of It's a funny thing to applaud. There's obviously some people in the audience that know this. I've talked to a lot of soldiers over the last year and a half, 2 years, who've been watching my lectures or listening to my podcasts, etc. And they said, and many of them have said that doing so has helped them rid themselves of their post-traumatic stress disorder because they've started to become sufficiently sophisticated philosophically and theologically so that they can put the terrible things that either happened to them or that they did, because especially in wartime, post-traumatic stress disorder is often caused when someone watches themselves do something they can't believe they could possibly do. And of course, well, what would you expect if you go to war? You know, you're maybe a naive person to begin with. You end up on the battlefield and several times, multiple times, God only knows what sort of situation you're going to be in, and God only knows what you'll do. And it certainly might not be something you think you could do, but like, what the hell do you know about yourself? I mean, people are very complicated, and they're very deep, and they're very dark. And you know, there's plenty of light in us as well, but there's plenty of dark, and the battlefield is definitely a place where you might encounter it and then have to bear that burden, you know. And if you don't have a context within which to put it, then it's an intolerable burden. You can't manage it. It's too much, the weight of that darkness that characterizes you. You can't reconcile that with your own version of yourself, your old version, naive, shallow version of yourself. And so then maybe you have to drink yourself into unconsciousness constantly because there's no other way that you know how to deal with it. And it's no wonder, like, I mean, these things are no mystery when you investigate them. You think, yeah, well, God, if that happened to me, or if I did that, either way, I'd bloody well be trying to hide inside a bottle too. But of course, that's not helpful, right? It's not a good long-term solution. It doesn't gets rid of you here and now for the time being, and that's something, but it's not a good solution for tomorrow or next week or next year. It's just a degenerating process. So I want to talk to you about the belief systems that we inhabit. And I want to take them all the way out to the edge. And partly taking them all the way out to the edge has something to do with that ability to confront what's terrible. And I would say that part of, okay, we'll do something sideways again here. One of the things we know about human beings is that we have the capacity to get deeply engaged in stories. And the other thing we know about human beings is that we have deep stories, and the deepest stories we have are religious stories. It's a matter of definition. So the deeper the story, the more like a religious story it's like. And it's also that we know that there are shallow stories, trivial stories, and that there are deep stories, and that some stories are unutterably deep. We all know that. We don't know why though, right? Because when you say, well, this is a very deep story, it's not like you can just come up with a set of reasons why it's deep, but you know that there are distinctions between literary types from shallow to deep, and deep seems to means profound. That's another way of thinking about it. It means a lot of things at the same time, at different levels of reality at the same time. That's another kind of indication of deep. And if the story's deep enough, well, then it becomes religious. It's so deep that it has that effect on you. It produces awe, let's say, or it's something that you can't forget, or it's something that a whole culture builds itself on, or it's a story that motivates extraordinary acts on people's part, like acts of self-sacrifice, or acts of courage, or acts of bravery, or acts of creativity. You know, you think about the consequence of Christianity in Europe when it was the flowering of this incredible architectural and artistic process over a period of about 2,000 years. I mean, it also, you know, your culture, insofar as it was derived from Europe, has elements of the same thing, that incredible architectural and artistic legacy that was all driven by these underlying fundamental religious ideas that no one really understood, but were obviously extraordinarily enthralled by, and built institutions to preserve and to reproduce and to describe and to discuss, even though they're mysterious in the same way that dreams are. Well, some of those stories have to do with the necessity of confrontation. Really, the necessity of confrontation. And more than that, because that's not the crucial thing. That's the pessimistic thing. The crucial thing is the notion that as a consequence of the voluntary confrontation, that victory can be attained. That's the light. And what's so interesting about that too, and it's why it's so rewarding to deal often with people who had post-traumatic stress disorders, because they've gone to dark places, man. Like, they're hellish places. And they come out. Not always, because, you know, if you encounter something terrible, it wouldn't be terrible if it couldn't kill you or permanently damage you. It would just be psychologically terrible. Not that that's trivial. It wouldn't be truly terrible. I had another client, a young person, who had been bullied very badly by someone in high school who they didn't want to have a relationship with. The person had asked them out and they refused. And so this person decided they were going to make their life hell on earth, which they did. And they hurt this person so badly that a psychotic episode ensued. And when I first saw the client, the person would sit there and move their hands like this. Couldn't really talk. And when I asked why, they said, well, I can see these lines and I'm trying to get the lines in order. And that's not normal behavior, you know, like to be uncommunicative like that, and then to also be so immersed in it, like in a hallucination that you're dreaming in that sense while you're awake. I mean, you're way past normality. And what had fundamentally happened was that the person who had been rejected romantically conspired with a friend to just tease and torment this person at every chance they could possibly manage in high school, and broke them. And so I talked to my client for a long time. They were also taking antipsychotic medication, which can be very helpful under such circumstances to at least dampen the symptomatology, although they really don't constitute a cure. And we went through what happened. You know, I asked my client, what happened? We laid out the story over about a 6-month period, written down using this program I developed called the Past Authoring Program, which helps people sort of organize their lives into a coherent biography, because you need to know where you've been so that you know who you are, and so that you know where you are, so that you can figure out where you're going. And you kind of have to tell the story of your life to yourself. It's like you're mapping where you've been. And if you haven't done that, then you're all over the place and your map is full of holes and you don't know where you are. And so it's a very useful thing to do. And it was quite painful because, well, there were a lot of negative things to discuss. But over the months, and not so long, we pieced it together. And this person was very curious about how it could be that someone could be so cruel as to make it their goal to destroy someone. You know, and that's a tough question. You know, and some of it had to do with their displeasure at being spurned romantically, right? People don't like that at all. And it's not surprising, you know, if you're enamored of someone, if you've developed an attraction to them, and you'd like to make that manifest. You certainly want it to be reflected, and it's sort of a validation of who you are to have it reflected. But if it's not, if it's rejected, it's like, well, maybe there's something wrong with you. I mean, that's your likely response. It's either that or anger. It's like, what the hell's wrong with you? Aren't I good enough for you? It's like, well, no, as a matter of fact, you're not good enough for me. Maybe you're not good enough, period. Like in some really fundamental sense, you're just not good enough, period. And that's a hell of a thing. And again, it's not merely psychological, it's real. You know, there's lots of people who get rejected nonstop, virtually their whole lives. And it's not always the case that the reason they get rejected is because they have fundamental flaws that are very difficult to rectify, but it's frequently the case that that's the reason, and that's not a straightforward thing to come to terms with. And so there's every reason to be unbelievably angry about that, and not only at the person that rejected you. You know, I mean, maybe there are all sorts of things that are wrong with you, that maybe they've been wrong from birth. You were just cursed with your inadequacies right at birth. That can certainly happen. And then you think, well, then who are you angry at? So you're angry at fate, you know, you're angry at the structure of the world in general. I mean, and what do? You shake your fist in rage at that, and maybe you take your revenge. And that was certainly what happened in this particular situation. And the school did a very bad job of intervening. And so anyways, as this person told the story, they came back to the world. It was very interesting. More and more coherent, more and more able to speak in complete sentences and then in complete paragraphs. Because if you're psychotic, you start to fragment, right down to the level of the word. If you're really psychotic, schizophrenic, your sentences no longer make sense. The way you put words together don't add up to the kinds of utterances that other people could understand. You have fragments of phrases and fragments of words, and it's like the words only mean what they mean to you and not to someone else anymore. And the crazier you are, to speak untechnically, the more fragmented your thinking gets. So if you're manic, and you can be pretty off the rails if you're manic, you can usually manage sentences and paragraphs pretty well, but anything above that isn't very coherent. But if you're schizophrenic, it's like even the words, you've got the words. Schizophrenics very seldomly invent whole new words, but they often don't mean what other people think they mean, and certainly the phrases don't. And I could see her put herself back together bit by bit. The phrases started to make sense, the sentences started to make sense, paragraphs started to make sense, and she started to make sense out of what this person was like. And not only that, what people were like, you know, not just this person that went after her, because it could have been some other person. It's a part of human nature that sort of thing can happen. And she was too young and too naive to understand that anyone could go out to purposefully hurt someone. And you know, that is a hell of a thing to encounter. You know, and it's amazing it doesn't break all of us. I think it does to some degree, you know, because when we're young, we're naive, and we think, at least to some degree, that everybody's good and that the world is a good place. And then, you know, we're betrayed, and then maybe we get cynical and bitter, and we think, well, you can't trust anyone. And which is true. It's true. Well, it is. It's true because everyone has the capacity to lie and deceive and betray and hurt. Everyone has that capacity, and so including you. And so then you might think, well, only a fool would trust. And that actually makes you wiser than the naive person, because the naive person thinks, you know, they're friendly and they'll open themselves up and maybe they'll engage in relationships and all that, but they're naive, so what the hell do they know? It's not like there's any mark of moral virtue there, it's just foolishness. I mean, it's a necessary foolishness, and it's an understandable foolishness, but there's nothing virtuous about naive optimism. All it is the viewpoint of an overprotected child. And then you get hurt, betrayed. Dante, when he wrote his book on hell, right, the Inferno, it's a journey into hell, levels of evil, because that's what Dante was trying to do. He was trying to map out the structure of evil. It's a very interesting book if you understand it in that light. It's like, well, here's minor sins, here's ways you could act that, well, they're kind of everyday terrible. But the deeper you go, the worse it gets. And for Dante, the worst was the betrayers. He had them right in the lowest level of hell, right beside Satan himself, who was encased in ice and unable to move, stubborn and arrogant and vicious and resentful, surrounded by the betrayers. And I think that's good. I think it's very accurate poetically because, when you betray someone, what you do is they trust you, and trust is a necessary precondition for human interaction, right? You and I can't interact together unless we trust each other. Because I don't know what the hell you're up to. And you don't know what I'm up to. And I could be up to anything if you don't know what I'm up to, and vice versa. And so that means if I don't trust you, I have to be sitting there paranoid, thinking about which set of demonic snakes happens to be taking possession of your action right now, and you have to be doing the same to me, and it's unbelievably effortful and difficult and damaging and demoralizing, and it interferes completely with any useful cooperation. It's just a bloody catastrophe. So what you have to do is trust. And you think, well, why can you trust when people are capable of all the terrible things they're capable of? And that's a hard question to answer when you've been hurt, and everyone's been hurt. And so then you might ask, well, why should you trust? Because that's for fools. And the answer is, because it's what you do if you're courageous, once you're past cynicism. Naivety first, hurt second, cynicism third, trust, courage fourth. You say, okay, look, the probability that you're any better than me is low, and that's not so good. But, that doesn't define you entirely. It doesn't define me entirely. And so how is it that we can call the best out of each other instead of the worst? And the answer is, well, you put your hand forward and trust. You say, well, here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to act that out, and here's what you're going to do, and we have a mutually negotiated solution, and we're going to assume that we can do it. And with our eyes open, right, knowing that that could be a faulty solution and that we're both laying ourselves open to further betrayal. But the upside is, it usually works. It's very, very common that the way you get the best out of someone, even if they're not good people, even if they've made many mistakes, is to trust them with your eyes open. And that seems to call the best out of them. So you say, okay, well, you have a duty to trust. It's a duty of courage. And it's not because you're naive or foolish, and it's because you've decided to dispense with your cynicism. And you're going to lay yourself open to the possibility of betrayal, because that's the best way of putting the world back into order. And I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. I think too, and there's lots of moral actions that seem to me to be associated with courage that we don't associate with courage because we don't understand them very well. Trust is one. Think, well, you can trust people because they're trustworthy. No. If you trust them, they might become trustworthy. That's a whole different thing. Gratitude's the same way. Like you should be grateful. First of all, it beats the hell out of being bitter, even though you have your reasons to be bitter, because bitter is a bad road. It takes you to a bad place. Whatever you're bitter about, you can bloody well be sure you're going to be much more bitter about the consequences of you being bitter, right? That's it. It's not a game that's an improvement. So you have your reasons. I was hurt, you say that. I was hurt, and really terribly, unforgivably, let's say. And I'm bitter about it. And so I'm going to withdraw from people, and I'm going to be cynical, and I'm going to be hurt, and I'm going to seek revenge as a consequence. It's like, well, go ahead. What happens? You end up in the same place that you were when everything that happened to you that hurt you happened, except worse. So that just seems like a non-starter. And so you replace bitterness with gratitude. And the reason you do that is because you're courageous and brave, not because you're naive and foolish. It's like you look and you think, no matter how bad your life is, and life can be pretty damn brutal, there are many things to be grateful about. You see people in dire straits, and you'll be in dire straits, and your family members will be in dire straits. And when my daughter was ill, because she was ill for a long time, we used to take her to the sick kids hospital in Toronto, and it was a nice hospital, as far as a hospital full of sick kids could be. The staff had done everything they could to make it the least amount of hell possible. And we were taking her there for pretty damn serious reasons. But then we'd pass, the multiple organ transplant ward and think, God, this is bad, but this was hell, but there's some hells underneath that, and then there's the hell of the multiple transplant ward for your child while your marriage is falling apart. There's that hell too. And maybe while you're losing your job, and maybe losing your sanity at the same time. It's like the bottom's a very long way down, man. And so there's reasons to be grateful, and you have to find them, and there's a moral necessity to manifest them. And the reason for that is because it's better if you do. It works better, and it is courageous to do that. All right, so I'm going to put all that off to the side for a minute, and then I'm going to start with something that's sort of simple, and I'm going to build it into something that's complicated, and I hope I can manage this properly. So when you're a psychologist, like one of the things you do is you expose people voluntarily to the things that they're afraid of or disgusted by and avoid that are in their way. You don't just teach people to go play in traffic because it's dangerous. It isn't merely a matter of confronting danger. That's foolish. It's confronting those things that frighten you and stop you, that are obstacles on your way to getting to somewhere that you need to go. So for example, let's say that you want to move up your career and you're terrified of public speaking. It's like, okay, well, if it's a sophisticated career, or any career for that matter, and you're terrified of public speaking, well then that's an obstacle. Like, you're not going to get there. And so then that's something that you have to face. And if you're a good psychologist, you break it down. You say, okay, well, you're afraid of public speaking. What are you afraid of exactly? Can you talk to one person? Can you talk to 3 people? Could you talk to 3 people for 2 minutes? Could you talk to 3 people for 30 seconds about what you did this morning? Like, you can usually find first of all, almost everyone can talk to some other person, so it's not a matter of like elective mutism. It isn't, I just can't speak. It's something other than that. It's like, well, I can't stand seeing all those eyes. One of the things I do when I'm public speaking is I just never talk to the crowd. So you never talk to a crowd. A crowd's an illusion anyways. You just talk to people, and I can talk to you. We can sit and have a conversation. That's what we're doing right now. And so I'm always looking at single people in the crowd, and then there's no crowd. And it works way better that way. And anyways, you help people break down their fears into smaller and smaller and smaller fears until you find a fear that's manageable. It's a dragon that's shrunk to manageable size. I could stomp on that thing, no problem. And then you move forward towards it and you overcome it. And maybe what you do if you're afraid of public speaking is you're at a meeting and you have some question that you need to have answered, and it's an actual question because you want to play this straight, and your first task is just ask a damn question at the meeting. And maybe you practice that with the therapist a little bit. What might you say, and how would you look at people? You don't look down at the table. You look at person's eyes, generally speaking, and maybe you put your hands like this so that they're not rattling around or doing all these things they might be doing while you're being nervous. You practice it, and then all of a sudden you find you can do it, and then you pick the next most difficult thing that you can manage, and you practice that, and pretty soon you get okay at it. I had another client who, when I first met her, couldn't go and have coffee with me at a coffee shop downstairs where I had my clinic, even though I was her therapist. That was out of her realm of capability. And by 10 years after that, it took 10 years, it's a long time, she was doing stand-up comedy. That's pretty good, you know? I mean, I don't know if she was any good at it. She had plenty of horrible stories to tell about her life, and everyone knows that's always funny. So, but you know, it was one step at a time for her, and she got an unbelievable long way. And you can get an unbelievably long way if you take things one small bit at a time. That's part of humility too, you know, which is another virtue that we don't talk much about. Humility is try not taking on a task that's bigger than you can manage, you know? And so if you have an ambition, I'm not saying don't be ambitious. You should be ambitious. I think you should be insanely ambitious in some sense, and we'll get to that. But, you know, that doesn't mean you get to go from here to saving the world without any intervening effort. You got to develop some skill. And so you have to think, well, if I'm going to get from here to here, from point A to point B, and I have this thing in my way, I'm afraid of public speaking, I'm embarrassed about that. Then I'm embarrassed about the fact that I have to do something so unbelievably trivial to overcome it that I don't even want to talk to anyone about it because it's so embarrassing to admit that I'm that afraid. It's like, well, you're just dead in the water then. You're stopped. You have to think, yeah, I really do have this problem. It's really that serious, and I'm only capable of taking this tiny step forward. You know, and that's humility. That's the best I can do. It's like, it's okay though, because it turns out that if you start doing things right in the direction of facing the things that you're avoiding, it's really good to think about this in terms of what you avoid. If you start to face the things that you're avoiding, you get better and better at it, faster and faster, in like a geometrical progression. It's not linear. You get a little better, and then you get a little better, and then you get a lot better, and then you get way better, and it's quite quick. So that's cool. You start slow, but it tends to accelerate. And so that's a worthwhile thing to know too. So even if you have to start, you know, with sometimes I was training people to not be afraid of elevators. You know, they had agoraphobia. And it was really a fear of death, and public humiliation is at the bottom of agoraphobia. So typical agoraphobic fantasy is that you'll go out somewhere, a mall or a theater, this is a good one, you'll get trapped in the theater and you'll start having a heart attack, and well, then you're going to die, and so, you know, that's not so good. But worse, there's going to be all these people around you watching, and so while you die, you're going to make a fool of yourself. And so, and that's kind of the two big human fears, right? There's fear of mortality, and so that would be the heart attack itself, and then there's fear of public exposure. And if you're agoraphobic, then you get both at once. It's like you're going to die, and you're going to die like an idiot. So, you know, and it isn't even obvious to people necessarily which of those two are worse, you know, but it doesn't matter. And well, you end up avoiding then places where you think something bad might happen to you, and because something bad might happen to you anywhere, like you could just have a heart attack. You could just have a heart attack right now if you wanted to, right where you're sitting. You could have a heart attack wherever you are. And so then you start avoiding places where you might have a heart attack, but that's not very helpful because, like, where are you not going to have a heart attack? And so what ends up is you're at home in your bed, and you might have a heart attack there too, but like where are you going to go? You know, you're at home in your bed. You can't escape from that. That's it. You've run away as much as you can. And so then you have to go back out into the world. And people get afraid of elevators, for example, because they think they'll get stuck in an elevator. And you might. And then you'll have a heart attack. And then you won't be able to call a doctor. And then you'll die. And so I remember one client, when I was doing exposure therapy with her, the doors opened and she looked and she said, "That's a tomb." And I thought, well, that's exactly it. And that's so interesting too, because that's kind of a place where you see the dream and the reality manifest itself at the same point in the world, hey? Because, you know, for an ordinary person, well, an elevator is just a way of getting from one floor to another. But when that dream pops up, that dream of death and mortality, then the elevator becomes a tomb. And the thing is, the world's a tomb.
She was never a mystery to me. It's like, well, why are you afraid of dying? That's her. She's afraid of dying. It's like, well, I never asked her, well, why are you afraid of dying? It's like, well, of course you're bloody well afraid of dying. Who isn't afraid of dying? What's really weird is that we're all not so petrified of dying every second of our lives that everybody should be immobile on their bed, not moving. Why? Well, I might die. It's like, well, yeah, it's true, you might die. It's like, well, how are you supposed to cope with that? And the answer is, people don't know. They just don't think about it. And so the ordinary person is the mysterious person. It's like, well, there you are going about your business. Thoughts of death are generally not entering your mind, even though could be your day to day. It's like, so why aren't you petrified? And the answer is, you don't know. You have no idea how it is that you manage that emotional regulation. Whereas someone who's developed agoraphobia, they've had all that protective layer peeled off, and all of a sudden they're seeing the world in its stark reality, and they just can't handle it. And they were never mysterious to me. It's like, oh, you're terrified out of your skull. Well, that makes perfect sense. I can understand that. It's like, it's these normal people going about their business day to day. It's like, how can they manage that? Anyways, for her it was a tomb, and I thought, yeah, well, fair enough, It's a low probability tomb, but what are you going to do to someone? You say, look, you're probably not going to die in the elevator. And they think, no, well, you don't get it. Infinite threat times tiny probability still constitutes far too much threat. And so you can never argue someone out of a phobia or fear for exactly that reason. It's like, I don't care how small the probability that I might die in the next 15 minutes is. That's not the point. The point is that I might die. It's not the probability issue. So what do you do with someone like that? Because in some sense, they've realized the truth of the world, but they've only realized part of the truth. That's the thing that's so interesting about doing exposure therapy in psychotherapy, and so interesting about people in general, because you re-socialize them in some sense. You say, well, look, you're afraid of elevators. Let's see if we can play with that a little bit. We can play with your fear. It's like, how do you feel about how if we sit at my computer screen and we'll type in elevator on Google and get a bunch of images of elevators, and we'll just sit here and look at them for a while. And the person thinks, I'd rather not. And we say, well, I'd rather not look at a bunch of bloody elevator pictures either. It's not really the point, But like, could you do it? Could you do it? Could you look at one? Could we see what would happen if you looked at one? It's like, well, yeah, I could do that. So then you pop up a picture of an elevator and you say to the person, well, how are you feeling about this? And, they say, well, I can feel my heart rate start to pound because that's a symptom of agoraphobia. And you say, well, just look at the damn thing for a while and see what happens. Just watch it. Just look at it. It's important to look at it because you're searching it out with your eyes. You're exploring with your eyes because your eyes are always moving constantly. They're exploratory organs. They're not just flat, what would you call, automatic processors of the world. They're like fingers. You're feeling the world with your eyes and looking at things. Just really look at that damn picture. Look at the doors and don't avoid, just look at it. And they do that, and maybe for 2 or 3 minutes, and then you say, well, how are you doing? And they say, well, I'm feeling better about this. You say, well, why don't you just look at the damn thing till you're bored? Because that's what you want. You go in a hallway and you see an elevator, you're bored. Well, congratulations, you're healthy. It's like you're not terrified of the elevator. It's like it's just, you don't even see it. It's a memory icon actually to you. It doesn't bother you. And for the person who's terrified of it, it's no longer a memory icon. It's like a tomb. It's like, okay, I'm bored. Okay, well, how about we look at like 5 other pictures of elevators? It's like, okay, and you do the same thing. And they do that. And at the end of the session, they're bored of looking at elevator pictures. And that's good. It's like, that's a successful session. And then there's a bunch of reasons. One is, well, they're less afraid of something than they were. That's cool. But what's even more cool, and this is way more important than the fact that they're no longer afraid, is that they're braver. Because that's the thing about therapy. And this is the thing about human learning, you see, is you don't learn, except if you're naive, you don't learn to not be afraid. You learn that you can cope and be brave. And those are way different things, because to be not afraid means there's no danger. Well, that's not wisdom. There's danger, man. There's you. You're dangerous enough. That's bloody well for sure. And everyone who knows you knows that. And if you don't know they know that, that just means you don't know that they know you, or they don't tell you. You know, and your partner's dangerous, and other people are dangerous, and nature's dangerous, and society is an oppressive patriarchy, and it's dangerous, and it's like, it's bloody well danger everywhere. And so, being not afraid, it's like, that's just foolishness. But being brave, that's a whole different thing. Because then maybe it doesn't matter that it's danger, that the danger is there. And maybe what you learn is that despite the fact that the danger is there, there's something in you that gives you enough courage so that no matter how much danger there is, you can actually manage it. And the question then would be, well, what do you mean manage? And it's like, well, that's a good question. It might mean more than merely tolerate. You know, I mean, we mastered fire, human beings. You know, that was no trivial thing. Fire is very, very dangerous. You can be sure that there were a lot of singed African apes playing with fire for thousands of years before they got it right, you know? And fire is extraordinarily dangerous. And it's so attractive to us, in part because of its danger, that we can't even not look at it. Hey, we're all descendants of arsonist apes, obviously, because you know what it's like to sit around a campfire. It's like it beats the hell out of television. You sit around a campfire, there's 5 or 6 of you, you're not really doing anything, maybe you're drinking some beer, it's like you're watching the campfire and you're thinking, man, that's so interesting, I could just watch that campfire forever. And it's a neurological issue. You don't get habituated to a campfire. It never becomes boring, it's always interesting. And it's because you're fascinated right to the core by fire. And it's because we mastered fire maybe 2 million years ago. It completely transformed us, transformed our diet, transformed everything. And it's because, well, we're the descendants of creatures that just could not stop looking at fire, you know? So we mastered it. Something unbelievably dangerous, right? It's not just fire, it's explosions, you know? It's smelting, it's foundries, it's munitions, it's gunpowder, it's bloody hydrogen bombs. It's like, it's a big deal to master that sort of explosive force. And we did it, and so we're not afraid of it. Even though the danger hasn't disappeared, well, we've mastered it. Well, that's better than no fear, mastery. And so the person looks at the pictures of the elevators, and they walk away and they think, hey, I could do that. That's so cool. Here I thought I was so afraid, and turns out that I just, put myself out a little bit and I could do it. And so they walk away knowing that there's more to them than they thought, because they thought they were the sort of thing that had to run away when they were afraid. But now all of a sudden they learned that they're not necessarily the sort of thing that has to run away when they're afraid. They're the sort of thing that can turn around and look. That's like my friend looked when he was looking at his dreams. He could turn around and look, and that would change, because he could discover that he was the sort of thing that could turn around and confront what was frightening. And so then the next time the person comes in, you say, okay, well, you looked at a bunch of pictures. Maybe you do a couple pictures again just to warm them up, because now they're a little nervous again. And then you take them out in the hallway where there's an elevator, and you say, okay, well, there's an elevator out there in the hallway. You say, yeah, I know, I took the stairs. It's like, how about if we go out and look at the elevator? You think you could do that? It's like, well, I don't want to get too close. It's like, yeah, okay, I don't care. 100 feet away, man. Maybe you barely see the elevator. Could you do that? Or could you just imagine the elevator? Well, they can do that. Say, well, yeah, I can look at the damn elevator from 100 feet away. So out you go in the hallway, and you're 100 feet away, or 10 feet away, or 30 feet away. You say, well, how are you doing? And they're thinking, well, I'm a little nervous. And you think, well, just think about the elevator doors opening. I don't want to think about that. So, well, just think about it for a minute. You're 100 feet away, whatever. You know, they open, some people get out, they close. That's that. Think about that a few times. And they calm down. We say, well, how about if we go like 20 feet closer to the elevator? And they think, yeah, I think I can do that. So they get, 10 feet away from the elevator, and they're kind of nervous, and you get them to stand there till they're sort of bored of the whole elevator thing, which is good, because now they're starting to replace the horrible tomb with a memory icon, and maybe the doors open and they kind of startle, and you have them do that a couple of times so they calm back down, and you say, well, is that enough for today, or do you think you can go a little further? And it could be enough, or maybe they want to go a little further. You say, well, how about if you just go and put your hand on the elevator, and we'll call it a day. So they do that, put their hand on their elevator, and they're pretty damn happy about that, because maybe it's the first time they've done it in 10 years, and they've been in their bloody bedroom for 10 years, They haven't been able to get out. It's no joke. And so they put their hand on death, and they think, I can do that, and they leave. And then the next time they come back, you say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go up to the elevator, and I'm not playing tricks on you, so you don't play tricks on your clients if you're a psychotherapist, if you have any sense at all. Say, I'm just going to, the doors are going to open, I'm going to hold them open, and you're just going to look inside. And it might buzz, so be prepared for that, because that might startle you. It might buzz, but I'm not letting them go, and there's no tricks. But what you have to do is just poke your head in. But when you poke your head in, don't just look at the ground. Don't avoid. Look inside. Look in the corners. Look up. Look around. See that it's an elevator. It's not a place full of snakes and rats and poisonous spiders, right? Because that's that dream that would be manifesting itself as threat. So they look in and they look around and they see that it's just a box. And maybe it's a box that you could die in like you could die anywhere, but it's just a box. And then maybe by the end of that, you get them to step in the elevator and look around and step out. And maybe if you're lucky, you actually get them to go down one floor. Say, I'll come down one floor with you. Doors will open. They say, well, what if we get trapped in here? It's like, well, what if we get trapped in here? What are we going to do? We're going to sit down. We're going to phone. We're going to sit down. We're going to calm ourselves down. It's not going to be too big a catastrophe. I'll be here with you. We're going to cope with it. You don't say, well, the chances of getting trapped in the elevator are very low. It's like, that's not the point. The point is, what do you do if the bad thing happens? That's the point. And so then, they can take the elevator, and then next week, maybe you take it 10 times till they're bored of taking the damn elevator. And then they come to therapy and they take the elevator all the time. And so that's good. And then they start taking taxis, and then they start going out and into theaters again, because agoraphobic people tend not to like theaters because they don't like being trapped in the middle of the audience, for example. And then maybe they have a terrible fight with their husband. That's very common. Often agoraphobic people are women, not always, but often. Men are more often alcoholic and antisocial. Women are more likely to have anxiety disorders. But then maybe the woman has a fight with her husband. And maybe she hasn't had a fight with him for like 10 years. And the reason for that was there's no damn way she wanted him to leave. And the reason for that was she was really dependent on him. And she needed to be dependent on him because she was too afraid. And so now all of a sudden she's not so afraid because she's braver. She's got some more courage. And maybe sometimes you even get resistance from the family members while improvement is going on, because sometimes there's some utility in having someone who's absolutely passive around, right? They're not going to threaten you or push you in any possible way because, well, for obvious reasons. And now all of a sudden, they're standing up straight with their shoulders back, They've got a little bit of courage in the world, and they're able to and willing to say some things that they might not have been willing to say, because one of the things that's so cool about courage is that it generalizes. Bravery generalizes, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And that's part of that. That's part of that. What would you call it? Deep story of the world. Let me see if I can put it together this way. If you have a child and you want the child to clean up his room, maybe he's 2.5 or 3, and if you have a 2.5-year-old and you put them in a room, unless everything's behind doors, the bloody place is a disaster in 15 seconds because they just pull everything off the shelves. It's like they're little agents of chaos, right? Order, child, chaos. You say, well, could you clean up the room? Because you're not very smart as a parent. And you go away for 10 minutes and you come back and it's like, it's not any more orderly. In fact, it's probably worse. And the child is sitting there, I don't know, playing with something and looks at you when you come in and nothing's changed, and you think, what the hell's wrong with you, stupid child? It's like, I told you to clean up this room, and it's no better. And it's like, well, it's the adult that's stupid. It's not the child in that circumstance. Not that children can't be stupid. If you've had children, you know perfectly well that they can be stupid. You were children, and you were stupid when you were children, and your children were stupid when they were children, and it's just the way of life. But you know, if you have a 2.5-year-old, you can say, all right, kiddo, you see that teddy bear? And by that time, they know what a teddy bear is, so that works. You're using your words to signify something the child understands. And so they're pretty happy about that, because children are happy when you say something to them and they understand it. And they're always trying to communicate in a way that gets adults to understand. It's part of the way they check the world out for truth. And so if you can say something to a child and they understand, unless it's like a baby thing that they're tired of, they're happy. It's like, yeah, I know what the teddy bear is. It's like, so good. Just pat them on the head. You want to pick up that teddy bear? It's like, oh yeah, I can do that. You pick up the teddy bear, they show it to you, and you think, hey, that's good, you picked up the teddy bear, good work. That's positive reinforcement, right? You say, see the shelf over there? Yes, I see the shelf. You see there's a hole in the shelf, a space. Maybe you have to walk over and say, see this space in the shelf? It's beside your favorite book. Kid says yes. Do you think you could take that teddy bear and you could pick it up and you could walk over there and you could put the teddy bear in the hole on the shelf by the book? And they think, you know, I think I could do that. So they go over and they put the teddy bear in there, and then they look at you. And the reason they're looking at you is they're thinking, what's the emotional significance of that event? And if you're smiling, then they think, oh, that was a good thing. And if you're frowning, then they think, oh, something's wrong, or I must have done something wrong. So this is a good thing to know if you're a parent or if you're a human being. If you know people, and you do, and the person that you're talking to does something, I'm telling you, if this is all you remember from tonight, this is worth the admission and the trouble. If the person you're talking to does something that you want them to do, don't punish them for it. Right? Don't punish them for it. You might think, well, of course you should have done that. I've seen people do this at meal times all the time, you know. Somebody makes a nice meal and no one says thank you. And you point it out and say, well, why didn't you say thank you? So, well, that's just what you're supposed to do. It's like, look, do you want like miserable, wretched, burnt garbage for the rest of your life delivered with hatred and contempt? Or, yeah, because that would justify my cynicism. It's like, or do you want meals to be innovative, delicious, prepared properly, and served with a certain amount of love? How would that be, since you're going to do it 3 times a day for the rest of your life? How would that be if you could have that? That's like hour a day. So that's an hour a meal. That's 3 hours a day. It's 21 hours a week. So that's half a work week per week of meal time. So that's in a year, that's 6 months of work days. Fixed for the rest of your life. And all you have to do is say, you know, you have to use your head. You have to think, okay, what went right with this meal that I would like to have duplicated? And could I call some attention to it in an honest way and say, you know, you did that really well, thank you. The person thinks, oh, thank you, wow, man, God, who knows, maybe I'll repeat that. You know, or something approximating. You do that 100 times, you know, and then you can have that little part of your life, which is not so little. You can have that thing working in a pretty pristine way. And it wouldn't be so bad to have like a lifetime of decent, caring meals laid out in front of you. You know, that'd take care of about 10% of your miserable life right there. So And it's so important. It's so important to get these things right, man. You know, because your days are made up of small, everyday things that you repeat. You know, it's like too, you come home at night from your job and you meet your family at the door, and that can be, you know, good or not good. And it's like 20 minutes, say, or 15 minutes, whatever, but it happens every day. So again, in a week, it happens 7 times, so let's call that an hour. And so in a month, that's 4 hours, and it's a year, it's 48 hours, so it's a whole work week. It's 2% of your life. All you have to do is fix 50 things like that, and your whole life is fixed. You think, okay, well, how would I want it to be when I come home at work? What would make me happy, you know? And being met by angry, bitter people, apart from your dog, you know, who at least hopefully is happy to see you, that's not a good way. And so maybe you think about it and you practice a little bit. You say, well, when one of us comes home, this is how we're going to do it. And then you've got the whole coming home thing down, and now you've got the meal thing down, and maybe you can get the how to put your children to bed without having a goddamn war about it every night thing down. And that'll take care of another 10 years of hatred and hassle. And you know, there's a variety of things you can do at a low level like that. Well, anyways, you have your kid, you say, all right, teddy bear in the shelf. Good work. Then maybe you do that with 3 or 4 more things. And like you scaffolded cleaning up. You say, well, that's how you clean up your room. You know, you find things that you know, one thing, and then you figure out where the thing goes, and then you put the thing there, and then you repeat that. And you can't just tell a child to clean up the room unless they know that. They have to have those elementary behavioral units mastered before they can compile them together into the abstraction that you would label clean up your room. And so you practice that. And it's kind of a pain because, you know, it'd be a lot easier for you just to go in there and clean up. It wouldn't, because it'd make you bitter and angry that you always have to clean up after your damn ungrateful child. But instead you could take the time and lay out the micro processes and reward each of them and scaffold them. See, and this is how you scaffold the development of someone. It's how you scaffold the development of your own character. It's how people are built. We have these little micro routines. They're little micro moral actions, like putting your toy away in the right place, and then putting all 50 toys in the right place, and then making your bed, and then, you know, your room is clean, and then, well, maybe outside of that you can learn to set the table. And so what you do is you take the child and you say, well, picking up teddy bear, putting teddy bear away, cleaning up room, taking some charge of household chores, being a relatively responsible child. No, let's move one down. Doing a certain degree of schoolwork when that becomes necessary. Learning how to play with your friends properly and taking turns. Being a reasonably responsible child. Turning into a reasonably responsible teenager. Making your way in the world as a responsible adult. Being a good person. Right? That's the hierarchy. That's the hierarchy. And that's how you look at the world. So you look at the world with those micro routines, you know, because say right now I'm thirsty, which I am, and so I'm going to go over here and I can recognize this and I know how to do this. And yes, well, thank you. Thank you. Now I'm much more likely to do it again. B.F. Skinner was a famous psychologist. He was very interested in reinforcement strategies, and he told people these stories. You could reinforce people for behavior. And so his class played a trick on him, which was that they never paid attention to him if he was on the left side of the room. And like a month into the class, they had him damn near out the door lecturing. So yeah, it's very funny. So you know, you get this scaffolding process built. You build all these little micro routines and you get the person up to being a good person. And being a good person isn't an abstraction because it's composed of all these little micro routines, right? So it's an abstraction when you say be a good person, but it's not an abstraction when you decompose it. And when your child's 2.5 and they didn't clean up their room, you don't go in there and say, you're a horrible child, you know, because the abstraction level's wrong. You could say, well, you're not very good at looking at the teddy bear. And the child might be able to tolerate that. I mean, it's unnecessary, but at least it's not a devastating assault on their entire character, which I would also recommend against if you're having a discussion with your wife or your husband. You're a terrible husband. You've always been a terrible husband, and the probability that you're going to change is very low. It's like, that's a war. Like, what the hell are you supposed to do with that? Agree? Well, well, you could, then you really win. It's like, you're right, man. I am that terrible, and you ain't seen nothing yet. So that's not good. And then instead, you decompose it. You think, okay, well, I'm irritated at this person. And maybe that's me. So you could say, well, I'm irritated at you. But that's maybe me, because maybe there's something wrong with me today. So why don't we find out who's the cause of the irritation here first? We could have that conversation. And then maybe we could figure out, well, there is something a bit wrong in our communication. And then we could think, well, what's the smallest thing we could do to set that right that would make both of us happy, that we could just try for like a day, just to see if it would work? And that's also unbelievably useful. It's so useful, that information. It's like if you're having a fight, shrink the damn thing. Use the smallest weapon you possibly can to enter into the argument with, and then find the minimal unit of improvement that you would accept. It's like, we have a rule in our house. We're having a fight. What can I do to make you happy? Well, you have to tell me. Well, if you loved me, you'd figure it out. It's like, no, I'm not that smart, or I don't love you that much. I don't know which it is. But you have the problem. Please offer me a solution. Well, what if you tried this? Well, I don't think I could go that far. Well, is there something a little less? What if you try? Okay, I'll try that. We'll try that and see how it goes. Okay, you won. Now you don't get to bother me about this anymore. That's another rule. You win, argument's over. That's annoying, eh? Because if you're arguing with someone and then they admit that you're right, it's really annoying because you don't want just to be right. You want to be right and stomp them a good one. And then if they're annoying and they just let you win and admit you're right, then they've deprived you of all the pleasure of being able to stomp them. And so it's very rude of them. But in any case, this process of decomposition is unbelievably useful. It's like, take the problem apart until you hit the smallest possible unit of improvement, and then see if you can implement that as a solution. And you don't have to do that very many times. You have to think, what am I unhappy about in my relationship? Okay, that's the first thing. And that's, I'm with the wrong person. It's like, no, sorry, no, vague. Besides, if you're with the wrong person now and you leave the person you're with, you will be with another person and they will also be the wrong person because you're probably the wrong person. And what makes you think you're going to trade up anyways? It's not like you're any better than you were 5 years ago. You're older and uglier at least. So, all right, so you get your child. Now, and you've got the micro routines down and you've reinforced them, and you're trying to do that with yourself, and you're trying to do that with the people you love. And then what's on the outermost edges of that? Well, that's where the courage comes. It's like, well, to be a good person. Well, what does it mean when you're cleaning your room, you're interacting with your family properly, you're interacting with your friends properly, right? You're bearing your responsibility. You're truthful. That's starting to become abstract. You're a good person. Okay, what does it mean that you're a good person? What's outside of that in some sense? Well, then that's when the big story starts to kick in. It's like, okay, well, what's the world like? At the biggest level, the biggest conceptual level. Well, there's the absolute unknown that surrounds us, right? The fact that we're all finite, ignorant creatures. And there's much we don't understand. And so we could say, well, here's one thing that's about being a good person. It's like, forthrightly confront that which you do not understand. That's a good thing. You wake up in the morning, you've got the day laid out in front of you with all of its possibility, all of the things you could do with it for better or worse. You think, I'm going to confront my obligations. I'm going to set what I need to do. I'm going to set right what I can set right for the day. Right? Frightening as it might be, I'm going to confront that dragon that constitutes the possibility of the day, and I'm going to take from it and distribute what I can. It's like, hey, that's good. That's a good thing. That's the core of positive humanity. Might say, well, and you can decompose that unknown. You can say, well, there's the unknown of the natural world, right? You know, maybe you're taking care of someone with Alzheimer's disease, and that's bloody rough. And so you're confronting the terror of the natural world in that sense. And you think, well, I'm going to get up and I'm going to try to make this day, I'm going to make the sacrifices that are necessary and take on the responsibility that I have to make this day the least amount of hell possible and to improve what I can. And so then you've construed yourself as that which can courageously confront the horrors of the natural world, right, in its most elemental form. So that's good. And then you might think, well, there's the social world. Maybe you have a job and you're working for someone who's somewhat of a tyrant, you know, and it's a problem that you're wrestling with. It's keeping you up at night. And you wake up in the morning and you think, you know, I've got a few things that I need to get off my chest. I've got a few things that I need to say. I have to think this through strategically because I'm not happy at my job. And the reason for that is I'm not being treated properly. And things aren't oriented in the right direction. I've got to stand up for myself. You think, well, I got to start planning this. Maybe I need a lateral escape route, right? Because maybe I'll get fired and I can't just be fired and have no job, so I have to have an escape route ready. And so I've got to plan that. I got to get my CV ready. I've got to get my education up to scratch so that I could move laterally. I have to be prepared for that. I have to not be afraid of an interview. I have to be willing to put out some resumes. Maybe I should be doing that now if I have something to say to my boss. And now I have to think through what it is that I have to say, and I need to say it in the minimally possible true manner. And so then you're confronting the tyrannical element of the social world. And you can do that too. So you can confront the unknown, and you can confront the natural world, and you can confront the social world, and you can set those things in better order. And then you might also think, well, there's me. I'm not everything I could be. I'm chock full of bad habits. You know, there are lots of things I'm avoiding and not doing. Sins of omission. Things I know I should be doing, that I could be doing, that I'm not doing. I'm not talking about the things that are beyond you. That's for later. I'm talking about the things that you bloody well know you could do, but you're just too, what would you call it? Self-sabotaging, arrogant, and deceitful to do it. You think, well, I'm going to try to look at a picture of an elevator today, you know? I'm going to tackle this thing that I've been avoiding. I'm going to negotiate with myself until I can find the smallest unit of that problem that I would be willing to confront, and I'm going to do it. And then so you've got that. You're confronting the negative part of yourself, and you might think, well, you know, I can be kind of malevolent. I've got a cruel streak, and there's lots of things about me that could be calmed down to some degree and matured and made a bit more sophisticated, and here's one of those things that's bothering me, and here's a tiny thing I might be able to do to ameliorate it. And so then you've got the person who can, you know, they can put their teddy bear on the shelf, and they can take care of their room, and they can take care of their house, and they can take care of themselves, and they can take care of their family. They can be a good person. And you think, well, what does it mean to be a good person? Well, it means that you can courageously confront the unknown and change it. You can make it better. You can confront the terrible part of nature, and you can make it less horrible than it needs to be. You can confront the tyrannical aspect of society, which is always there, and you can make it less tyrannical than it would be. And you can confront the devil that lives in your own heart and, what would you call, and learn to properly prevail. And that's the fundamental religious story. That's what people are like. That's our consciousness. We're thrown into the world, into the unknown. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. It's mortally dangerous. And we're subsumed by our ignorance. But with courage and truth, we can confront it and we can make it better. And we can do it at all those levels. We can make it better at the natural level. We can make it better at the societal level. And we can make it better at the individual level. And that's what we're called forth to do, you know? And then when you're thinking about life and its meaning, you think, well, what's the meaning of life? Well, the meaning of life is to be a good person. And why is that exactly? It's like, well, that seems like a bit mealy-mouthed and naive. It's like, it's none of those things, because there's nothing about being good that's weak. It's completely the opposite. It's a matter of adopting the most difficult burden that you can possibly comprehend. You're going to face the unknown forthrightly with your consciousness, right? To confront the potential of being and to try to transform it into something that's more like heaven and less like hell. And that's your job all the time. That's what you do with your conscious awareness. And how you do it matters. If you do it badly, things actually get worse. And they can get really worse. Or they can get really much, much better. And then you can decompose it into these elements. Man against nature, man against society, man against himself. And it goes for women as well. And to make things better. And to discover in the horror of life and the pessimism and darkness and mortality of life, the fact that despite all that darkness, there's something in you that's so light and so powerful and so courageous and so possessed by the spirit of truth, that's indomitable. Truth is indomitable, that you can take all of that that's terrible and transmute it into what is good. And that's what we need to do. Thank you very much.
I suspect you guys could feel it, but you got serious prime Peterson right there. He is really enjoying Australia. And actually one of the amazing things is that everyone's incorporating these things into their lives. For me, for example, I actually put my teddy bear away now. And Jordan nods approvingly, so it's pretty good. All right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do a little Q&A right now, and you guys submitted a ton of questions here. This is actually Jordan's computer, and I have the password these days. He's logged into Twitter right now. I could end it all here in Adelaide. That's a lot of power. All right, guys, make some noise for Jordan. You're feeling good in Australia. I can see it. There's like a pep in your step, and you're enjoying this.
When I left Toronto, it was 35 below, and there was blowing snow, and the whole city was a parking lot. And so now I'm here, and like I was on the beach in Perth, like for 2 days, and today I went outside and I didn't die. So, so that's good, yeah.
Pretty good. All right, here we go. What can I do to keep myself from becoming complacent when things go well? It's a good follow-up.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I would say that you should you're too shallow. And I don't mean that as an insult. Although maybe it's an insult. I don't know how shallow you are. It might be an insult. Your horizons are too limited. That's the thing. It's like you haven't picked a big enough problem. And you don't want to be complacent. It's like there's what's a complacent is like a neutered tomcat laying on top of a warm TV. You know, it's not. It's They really don't do that anymore, do they? It's like, what, you lay on a flat screen? You can't be a complacent cat laying on top of a flat screen.
Yeah, that's the reverse of a complacent cat.
Right.
That's an impressive cat.
There's a bit of a challenge there. Yeah, set your sights higher, man. That's the thing. You know, I have this program online called the Future Authoring Program, which I would recommend if you're miserable or if you're complacent, or to anyone for that matter, because I think it's an unbelievably useful program. And what it asks you to do is to think, it asks you to set your sights high. So, you know, we went through this idea today that the way you look at the world is nested, right? You have these little micro routines that you manage, and then they're amalgamated into more complicated behaviors and so on, that include more people and more phenomena and more of the world as you move outward. Until you kind of reach the outer limits, which is to contend with nature and to contend with society and to contend with the individual. And I said those are religious ideas in some senses. Like, one of the oldest stories we have is like there's two fundamental creation story types, and one is a deity, a conscious being, an aware being, usually someone with great vision and great ability to articulate, takes apart a feminine figure that constitutes chaos and makes the world out of the pieces. And that's what we do. We confront chaos and we make order out of it. And the spirit in us that does that is associated in our stories with divinity. And that's really worth thinking about, because that's what consciousness does. And we're all conscious, and we don't bloody well understand consciousness. It's a very strange phenomena. But we're conscious, and we do confront the unknown, and we do make the world out of it. And so there's something to that. And a second story is that a hero, again, someone with vision, someone articulate, someone brave, confronts an ogre or a tyrannical giant of some sort, and cuts him into pieces and makes the world out of his pieces. And it's the same story. It's like, you know, if you work for a corrupt corporation and you're trying to fix it, what you do is you break it into pieces. And you destroy the corruption, and then you reconstitute it into something new. And you're doing that with yourself, you know, because you need some work, and you need some work. We all need some work. You take the tyrannical giant that you are, and you break it up, and you reorganize the pieces, and hopefully in the reorganization you come up with something better. And so that's the story. And then at the individual level, well, you confront your own malevolence, let's say, or maybe your own complacency. And there's lots of problems in the world that need to be solved. And so you shouldn't limit your ambition. God only knows what magnitude of problem you could solve. It's not obvious, because people, as unbounded as the world is in catastrophe, people are equally unbounded in possibility. That's why it says, you know, if you have a modicum of faith, you can move a mountain. And we move mountains all the time. We can actually do that. I mean, you know, you need tractors and all that. You can't just wish the damn thing away, but it's amazing what we're capable of doing. And we're not doing that good a job of it, right? Because we wander around like 40% bitter, miserable, cynical, twisted, and ignorant, and we still manage fairly well. All right, so you're complacent. You have this program. Well, the program asks you to imagine. Okay, so imagine. This is how you set your aim. Imagine you could have what you wanted. But it would have to be the sort of want that someone who is wise would want. You know, so it would have to be, like rule 2 is treat yourself like you're someone that you have the responsibility for helping. It's a responsibility. So you're going to treat yourself properly. So you think, well, if I was going to set up my life properly, I was going to take care of myself, what would that look like? And so the program asks you, well, if you could have the friends you wanted and the relationships with them that you wanted, what would that look like? Just hypothetically. You know, imagine you had a genie. That's the root word of genius, right? Genie. A genie is this incredibly powerful, divine-like force that grants wishes, that's constrained in a very tiny area. That's what you're like, right? Because you're constrained in a very tiny area, but you have this immense genius possibility. It's like you can call on that. You have to do it in an intelligent and wise manner, or it backfires on you. It's like, well, you can have the friends you want and the relationships you want. What would that look like? You could have the career you wanted, or the job. What would that look like? What about an intimate relationship, if you could have the one you wanted? What about your relationship with your kids and your parents? How could that be if it could be the way that it should be? What would you do with your life outside of work that would be productive and meaningful? How would you take care of yourself mentally and physically? That sort of thing. It's just have a vision of what could be like 3 to 5 years down the road. Well, and then make a plan. And then the program also asks you to do the contrary, which is also very useful, because, you know, it's one thing to be motivated by the hope that things could be better, but, well, there is some danger in complacency there. Because, yeah, things could be better, but they're pretty good, so that's good enough. It's like, yeah, fair enough. You need some more motivation. There's this funny experiment that was done by animal experimentalists with rats. The rats didn't think it was that funny, but the experimentalists thought it was funny. You can train a rat to run down a runway to get some cheese if he's hungry. And you usually use hungry rats in experiments because they're more pliable, because they'll work for food. And so if your rat's hungry, they're often down to about 3/4 of their normal body weight, experimental rats. They'll zip down a runway pretty damn quick to nab a piece of cheese. And so, you know, they know the cheese is there, so away they go. But if you take a cat and you put the cat behind the rat and you put a fan behind the cat and you waft a little bit of cat odor over the rat before it runs down the runway, it will run down that runway way faster. Because it's kind of not so bad to be motivated by terror and by hope at the same time. Right, well, you're a lot more motivated then, right? And you know, and life is hard, and so having some extra motivation, that's not such a bad thing. It can get you out of bed. Terror can get you out of bed when mere hope won't. And the combination of both might be optimal. So the other thing that we have people do in this program is like, okay, well, now you've outlined your future, what you could have if things went well for you and for the people around you, because you should keep them in mind as well. But also, you've got a bunch of bad habits and you're not who you could be. And there's lots of ways that you would and might degenerate over the next 5 years. Everyone's aware of how they would do that if they were going to do it. Write that out too. It's like, okay, I let all my bad habits take the upper hand, and now I'm in my own personal brand of hell 5 years from now. What exactly does that look like? Good thing to do if you're toying with an addiction. You know, and you're still sort of semi-functional. It's like, if you're toying with an addiction and it's getting worse, you're semi-functional. You probably won't be in 5 years. It's not a pretty thing, and people won't conceptualize and clarify it because it's too frightening, and it would also stop them from being addicted, and they don't want to stop from being addicted, so they don't do it. You lay out the hell and you lay out the heaven, and then you think, well, I'm not going down because it's really not good there. And I would like to go up because I've created an up that's good enough so that it's worth the effort. And so if you're complacent, it's like, think it through, man. You got more to do. The world isn't in the shape it could be in by any stretch of the imagination. And there's plenty more for you to do. And I think that one of the rules of being, and this is one of the rules that the West has really done a great job of articulating, is it's on you. That's why you have the right and the obligation to vote. You're the cornerstone of the state. If things are not good, it's your fault. You might think, well, I don't know what to do with it. It's like, about it? It's like, yeah, no kidding. What's your point? Your ignorance is your excuse. Fair enough, you know. It's a real excuse, but it's no justification. If the world isn't the way it should be, then put it in order. And if you're complacent, then you should open your eyes, because there's lots to be done. And you could do it, and then you'd have the adventure of your life. And that's what you want. And so everyone wins under those circumstances. You get to have the adventure of your life, you get to have a meaning that comes with pursuing difficult things and avoiding terrible things, and you make things better for yourself and everyone else. There's no room for complacency there. And don't underestimate your capacity. You know, human beings are unbelievably remarkable creatures. And we don't exploit that fully. We exploit it minimally. And we're still pretty damn remarkable. So
I don't think we're going to get to all the questions tonight. Well, I love this one because, you know, they've got, you know, possibly the leading public intellectual in the world on stage, and the question is, Jordan, how much can you bench press? It's there.
The most I ever bench pressed was 225 pounds, and I only did that once, and I was about 24. And it was like 20 pounds more than I ever managed in my life, and it was 20 pounds more than I ever managed again. So it was a good day. And now, I don't know. I would think maybe I might be able to manage 150. Because I haven't done a lot of bench pressing. I think I might be able to manage 150. So, but
then again, it might just fall down and crush my neck too. So,
Well, actually, that's a decent segue. A lot of people tonight asked you about the carnivore diet.
yeah.
Any thoughts up? They're just asking you, how you're feeling and you think it's working, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, it's definitely working. I mean, it's such a funny thing to talk about because it's not really my area of expertise, and I kind of stumbled into it by mistake or by accident. I mean, what happened, some of you know this story, is that my daughter, Michaela, has a very serious autoimmune disease. And they had diagnosed it as idiopathic, first of all, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which it wasn't because she didn't have the blood markers for rheumatoid arthritis. So then they called it idiopathic arthritis, which means no one knows what causes it. Idiopathic is just a word that sounds like a diagnosis that means we don't know. So, and it was killing her, and in a bunch of ways, and all of them extraordinarily unpleasant. So she had 38 affected joints, and I don't know if you've ever had arthritis, but one seriously arthritic joint can make your life pretty miserable. And so 38 of them can make your life very miserable. And along with that went a very crippling depression, which is also linked to autoimmune disorders in many cases. So some of you who are depressed, that's a useful thing to know. There's lots of evidence that certain forms of depression, because it's a catch-all category, are associated with inflammatory disorders and autoimmune dysfunction. So if you are depressed, don't leap to the conclusion that it's necessarily psychological, even though it might be. There are endogenous depressions and exogenous depressions. Endogenous is caused by some internal factor that people don't understand, and exogenous is like grief-related, something terrible happened in your life and took you out, and you have reason to be depressed. But so she had terrible, terrible depression. And her depression was bad enough so that when I asked her at one point, because I was curious, and this was when she had an ankle that was deteriorating to the point that it had to be replaced, and a hip that was deteriorating to the point that it had to be replaced, and she was walking around on both of them at the same time on very high doses of opiates to control the pain, and taking Ritalin so that she could wake up for some periods of time in the morning. I asked her if she would rather have the arthritis or the depression, and she said she would rather have the arthritis. So that gives you some sense of what depression can be like. I wouldn't wish that on Hitler. I'll tell you, man, it's something brutal and it's inconceivable unless you've gone through it. And then she had narcolepsy and then like 5 other problems. And they were taking her apart. And she cottoned on to the idea at one point that it was diet related. And my wife had been pushing that idea for a very long time, for like decades. But we identified a few things that seemed to make her condition worse, but we could never zero in on it exactly. But Michaela figured out that when she was studying at university, her symptoms got worse, and her skin, she also had an autoimmune skin disorder that the doctors diagnosed as acne, which wasn't. It was something worse. And she figured that out as well. She figured out that when she was studying for exams, that got worse. And then she thought, well, that was probably stress. And then she thought, well, wait, I eat a lot of sandwiches when I'm studying. She lived in Montreal. She was eating bagels all the time because, they're quick. She said, maybe it was the bagels. And she wasn't happy about the skin outbreaks. Like one of the things she had managed to do while she was trying to hold herself together, she learned to be a kind of a semi-professional makeup artist because she could put herself together and go out and look like, like she was together. And that was really important to her. And then this skin problem started to take that apart, and that was just too much for her, So anyway, she stopped eating wheat, and her skin problems went away. Like right away. We thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And she thought, oh, well, my skin problems went away. That's interesting. I wonder what happens if I, cut out other foods. And so she experimented a lot using elimination diets, and there's a whole bunch of elimination diets. And mostly they're stupid. because there's 10 of them and they all tell you different things. And so how do you know? And then it's too many factors. Like if you're doing something scientifically, you want to reduce everything to a single variable and test the single variable. It's the only way you can get anywhere. And so she experimented, and at one point she was just eating chicken and broccoli. And then she got less depressed and she started to wake up in the morning and her joints started to get better. So those were good things. And then she just went to chicken. And then she just went to beef. And when she just went to beef, then things really got better. And all of her symptoms disappeared one by one, every single one of them. So, and that was just absolutely beyond belief. The first thing that happened, if I remember correctly, was that she started to wake up in the morning. And she was sleeping about 18 hours a day. And so all of a sudden she was waking up and was awake for like 16 hours and alert. And then her mood improved. Then her joints started to stop hurting. And I don't know if I have this in the right order. And the downside was, while she was doing that, then if she ate something that she shouldn't eat, she had a catastrophic reaction to it. All her symptoms would come back and worse. So there was some danger in it. But after several months of this, she was symptom-free. No medication, no painkillers, no Ritalin, no autoimmune disorder medication, no symptoms. I thought, Jesus, what the hell? That's unbelievable. And she lost weight. She lost about 25 pounds, something like that, and like looked good. And I have a fair number of autoimmune symptoms, and so does my wife. And so it looks like Michaela got all of them. And so we started to experiment with the diet. And so, because I thought, oh, Jesus, I can do that for a month. What the hell, you know? And first it was just meat and greens. And so I switched just to meat and greens, no carbohydrates, no sugar, nothing like that. And I started to wake up in the morning and feel good. And that had never happened to me in my life. I always had a hard time waking up. I just wake up and I thought, hey, I'm awake. What the hell? Because I could always go back to sleep. And so that was weird. And I quit snoring. In 1 week, it just stopped. And I was snoring quite a lot. So that was weird. That was really weird. That really shocked me. And then I lost 7 pounds the first month that I was on the diet. And I had not eaten sugar for a whole year, the year before that. I didn't lose any weight at all. It's like 7 pounds. Like that's, noticeable. I thought, what the hell? 7 pounds, that's a lot. So then I just kept doing it. I lost 7 pounds the next month, and the next month, and the next month, and the next month. I lost 50 pounds in 6 months. I went right back to my weight at 24. I thought, like, I lost all my excess weight, every bit of it. I thought, what the hell? That's completely insane. And then I stopped taking antidepressants. And I'd been taking them for like 20 years. I didn't need them anymore. They didn't have the same effect on me anymore. And then a lot of my mental acuity started to come back. And that was interesting because I noticed that as I got older, it was harder to concentrate when I was reading. Like it was more like there was kind of fog between me and the words, and I would skip words and skip phrases, and I couldn't focus like I used to be able to focus, because I could focus on written material perfectly, like I'd never miss a word, and you could talk to me when I was reading and I wouldn't hear you. I was focused. That started to come back. I thought, wow, floaters in my eyes started to clear up. So that was really interesting. I had numb legs. That went away. I had gastric reflex disorder. It sounded like I was going to die, but that went away really quickly. And so, well, you can't ignore that. It's like, and my wife, she had arthritis in her thumbs. That went away. She had arthritis in her knees. That went away. She had a shoulder that had been bothering her since she was 17 and had injured it, I think, playing baseball. So that was like 40 years ago. That went away. So now she can do front crawl and swim. And she hadn't been able to do that for years. And she lost 20 pounds, something like that. So she's back to what she weighed when she was 19, 20 years old. That's very, very difficult to ignore. So what's the downside? It's a pain in the neck. That's the first thing. Jesus, all I eat is beef. Like, that's it, nothing else. Beef and salt. Oh yes, and 3 kinds of water. Hot water, cold water, and sparkling water. It's like that, that's not a lot of diversity. And it's difficult to travel. And I'm a pain in the ass socially because, like, what are you going to feed me? And it's dull because it's mostly what I eat when I travel is steak because I can always get a steak somewhere. I mean, it beats the hell out of gruel. So, that's the gratitude part. And I'm physically stronger than I was. And so, I don't know what the hell to make of all that. I do know that 1 in 3 Americans is obese and another 1 in 3 is overweight. That's way too many. I know that diabetes is epidemic. I know that Alzheimer's is likely a 4th form of diabetes. We eat way too many carbohydrates. We eat way too much sugar. There's something wrong with our diet. Now, that doesn't mean I would recommend a cure this radical, but one thing I would suggest, and I've had lots of people come and talk to me about the carnivore diet, after these talks, they'll talk to me and people said, and one guy, he came up, he's about 24, he said, I've been on the carnivore diet. I lost 300 pounds in 18 months. I thought, he was still a pretty big guy. He must have weighed like 530 pounds because he was still a big guy. And so, but I'll tell you, if you want to lose weight, man, that will take all your excess weight away, period. So that's something quite remarkable. But I wouldn't casually recommend it because, first of all, it's untried. Like there was an article in the Atlantic Monthly 6 months ago about how I was going to be dead by now because of what I was doing, because my blood chemistry would be completely dysregulated and my gut biome would be half dead, and like there was prognostications of how I would go out of control in 50 different ways, and like none of that's happened. And my daughter's had her blood work done and she's been on this diet for longer than me, and she's a little low in vitamin D, but other than that her blood work is way better than it's ever been. And there are stories that are credible of people surviving on nothing but meat literally for decades. The Inuit used to do it, for example, in Canada. So I think what we know about diet, you could put in a thimble and have room for another thimble. So I wouldn't recommend it because it's hard, But I would say this, if there's a bunch of things wrong with you and no one can figure out why, one of the things you could think about doing is eliminating everything in your diet but beef. Everything. Because that gets rid of all those excess variables, right? Because you can think of every food as a variable. It gets rid of all the excess variables. It's much smarter than an elimination diet. Try it for a month. It has to be a month. The other thing that happens too is that your appetite declines by about 75%. So that's really interesting. If you don't get hungry, you don't have cravings for other foods. Although I really miss cappuccinos. They just kills me not to have cappuccinos. But other than that, I don't really crave that much. So if you can stick it out for a month, your appetite declines precipitously and you don't crave things anymore. And you don't get that weird hunger that not everyone gets that makes you fuzzy-minded and makes it difficult to concentrate and makes you irritable. That goes away too. So try it for a month. If you feel better, well, then you feel better. And that's something. And so then try it for another month. And, if it keeps helping, well, good, something helped. And then, after a while, you could experiment and add something else that you want and see what happens. But I'm not a nutritionist. I am a scientist, and I'm very careful about these things, but I'm not a nutritionist. But that is what happened in our family. And my daughter is in remarkably good shape. It's absolutely unbelievable. She tells me that her mood is regularly at something approximating 9 out of 10, like chronically. She's happy virtually all the time. And she doesn't have any symptoms. And like this was an incurable disease. Oh yes, the other thing that happened to me that's quite interesting is that I had gum disease, which is incurable. It's not, because I don't have it anymore. And my dentist verified that about 4 months ago. So, and gum disease is actually not a good illness. It's a marker of systemic inflammation. And it is a predictor of heart disease. And so if you can not have it, it's definitely better. So that's what's happened to me and my family. And as I said, I wouldn't casually recommend it because it makes you a social pariah, and it's quite difficult. But if you're bloody desperate and there's lots of things wrong with you and nobody can figure out why, and life's a bitch, then a month of just meat won't kill you. So maybe it's worth a shot.
All right, well, unfortunately, we only have time for one more, so I'll give you a little red meat here, so to speak. What's been your favorite part of Australia?
I have to say that, don't I? Definitely Adelaide. We walked through the botanical gardens today. That was pretty nice. That was impressive. I like Australia. I was here 6 months ago, something like that, and it's a pretty decent country. Like, your cities are in pretty good shape. They're quite livable. They're quite beautiful. They're quite peaceful. You've got a remarkable civilization happening here. So it's very nice to be here. I think that the country looks better than Canada. I think it's a little richer. It might be that you don't have to put up with -40 for 6 months of the year, which is pretty hard on the infrastructure, but it looks like you're doing a lot of things right. So it's quite a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed the beach at Perth a lot. It was very beautiful, and so it's nice to be somewhere warm and sunny, and so that was lovely. I suppose the best thing, though, altogether, is to come to these events. Fundamentally, like, it's a real privilege to come here, and it's such a shock to me all the time to see there's 2,500 of you here tonight. These are very serious conversations. Like, I don't know what the hell you're doing here, Well, hopefully it's something good, despite what the protesters outside think. This is my favorite part of it. I'm hoping that it'll help a lot, and that that each of you will put your lives together to some slight degree more than might otherwise have been the case. Because if enough of us do that, then things could get way better than they are, because we're in a situation right now, we're at a time when we have tremendous technological power and unbelievable opportunity in front of us, and a lot of questions that are going to have to be answered by wise people in the next 10 years, questions we can't even imagine now. And if each of us was a modicum more wise, then maybe we would make decisions that were just that much better, and things would go that much better. And I'm hoping that that's why everyone's here, is to figure out how to do that. And I think that's the case. And so that's my favorite thing about being here. And thank you very much all for coming tonight.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin.
If you found this conversation meaningful, you might think about picking up Dad's books, Maps of Meaning and Architecture of Belief, or his newer bestseller, 12 Rules for Life and Antidote to Chaos. Both of these works delve much deeper into the topics covered in the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. See jordanbpeterson.com for audio, ebook, and text links, or pick up the books at your favorite bookseller. Remember to check out jordanbpeterson.com/personality for information on his new e-course. Tag Jordan or I on Instagram to share your results from the Discovering Personality course if you decide to give it a shot. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, please leave a rating at Apple Podcasts, a comment or review, or share this episode with a friend. Thanks for tuning in, and talk to you next week.
Follow me on my YouTube channel, Jordan B. Peterson, on Twitter at Jordan B. Peterson, on Facebook at Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, and at Instagram at jordan.b.peterson. Details on this show, access to my blog, information about my tour dates and other events, and my list of recommended books can be found on my website, jordanbpeterson.com. My online writing programs, designed to help people straighten out their pasts, understand themselves in the present, and develop a sophisticated vision and strategy for the future, can be found at selfauthoring.com. That's selfauthoring.com. From the Westwood One Podcast Network.